Welcome back, sweet people. Are you ready to bake? I am. Today we are literally going to be baking. We're going to be using our yeasty beasties and making a sandwich loaf. And by sandwich loaf, I mean the best sandwich loaf ever. I've had many reviews of this and they are all fantastic. What's special about this is that it's one of those squidgy loaves like from childhood, but it has some really beautiful and healthy ingredients added to it. So if you're one of those people that loves just the white squidgy loaves, this is for you. And it'll give you some fiber and other gorgeous things. You know what I mean, squidgy. It's soft, it's supple. It gives a little bounce when you give it a little squeeze. So one of the things that's gonna help us get that texture is the water quotient. And notice that it doesn't look like normal water. It might look off to you, but it's not. This is starch water. And that's why it's cloudy. And I always save that when I make the pasta or the potatoes. I also make sure not to oversalt the water because I don't want to oversalt my dough. But that extra starch allows you to get a softer loaf. I also have butter, which is always fantastic, and this is 56 grams or half a unsalted stick. I have some salt, it's about a tablespoon, and I have 1 cup of oats. I promised you fiber, here it is. So when you have anything like oats, and these aren't quick cooked, these are just normal oats, any kind of inclusion like oats or say sunflower seeds, those inclusions need to be a part of a soaker. What a soaker is you add the ingredients to I usually use a microwave safe bowl because I do this in the microwave. You add the salt, whatever is going to be in the soaker, the inclusion, the butter, and your, in this case, starch water, or if you're going to use regular water, that's fine too. So what the soaker does is it's going to go into the microwave. It's going to get just a little hot enough to melt the butter. What it's also going to do is that the oats are going to start absorbing some of the water early on. If you don't soak inclusions like the oats, like sunflower seeds, what happens is that it starts stealing moisture from the dough itself. So you want to get it saturated ahead of time so that it doesn't start stealing all the goodness from the bread. So 30 seconds to a minute in the microwave, get that butter melted, and then allow it to sit and kind of soak up for about 10 minutes after that. Forgot the maple. Whoopsie! So the maple goes into sweetness, goodness, maple. Don't forget it. Okay, now we're gonna go soaker into the microwave. My soaker is soaked and ready. I have 2 types of flour that are gonna go into the dough, and I have my yeast on standby. So the first quotient of flour is all-purpose unbleached flour, and I'm gonna put it in the bowl first. And then I have a smaller portion of whole wheat flour. So this will give it texture and taste and numminess. And then I'm going to add the yeast directly to the dry ingredients because this is instant yeast. So the whole point of it is that it doesn't need to be hydrated before you use it. You can add it, straight to, look at that. And it works beautifully. And then next, all I want to do is whisk this up so that everything is well combined. You can get all these recipes on redstaryeast.com, so you can make all these gorgeous things at home. I always add the liquid ingredients first. If you add the dry first and then the liquid on top, what happens is that often you'll get dry pockets that will stick around the nubbin. This is what I call the nubbin, right here. That's the nubbin. And so flour will often collect right here if you put it in first. And then the dough hook is not going to engage with whatever's in there. And then you think everything looks fantastic. You pour out your dough and you notice that there are all these grody, gritty, dry bits in there. So always do the wet stuff first. And in this case, it's our soaker that has cooled down quite a bit. You do not want this to be hot when you add it. So all that goes in. And remember, we want those oats to hydrate, so let them sit at least 10 minutes, and you can do it longer. You can do it 20 minutes, half hour. And then right on top of that, I'm going to add all the flour. And then I'm going to mix on speed 2 or 3. It's usually just above stir for about 10 minutes, or until you see and you hear that the dough is starting to shear off of that dough hook. You'll hear it as well as see it. You'll hear it start going flop, flop, flop. And when you see it, you'll notice that the dough will kind of widen out at the bottom of the bowl and then start collecting itself around the whisk, go up, and then shear off of that dough hook. You can hear that slapping, you know it's ready. So we'll take it out and we will transfer it to a bowl so that it can bulk ferment. It's going to double in size. Is this bowl too small? Yes, it is. But there's a method to my madness. So this is a little sticky. So I use a bowl scraper to get it all out because this stuff is gorgeous. And this makes 2 whole loaves. I use a 9x4x4 bread pan. You can also use an 8x4.5 bread pan. If you use a Pullman pan, know that the timing can be a little different. But the great thing is that if you have a good digital thermometer, if you are kind of unsure what that timing would be, you will check the center of the dough, and if it reads 190 Fahrenheit, then it's good to go. So that's my done. You like that bowl's perfect, right? It's not going anywhere. Au contraire, mon frere, it's going to be moving and shaking, but I like the drama. So hence the smaller bowl, because it just I live for the drama, the yeast drama that is. So that is doubled in size, and this one is going to have its rest. It'll take about an hour to an hour and a half. It really depends on the temperature of your room. So if it's room temperature, I would say 45 minutes to an hour. If it's very humid and hot, it could be even faster. So just keep an eye on it and know that it will continue to grow. And if it's starting to jiggle, it's time. Once it is this size, it is time to punch it down and divide it. Yeah. And what we're doing when you punch it down, obviously it'll be much easier to handle, but we're making sure that all that air that's dividing the yeast from its food is going to be compressed so that we get a second feed, essentially. So that is all that gas that yeast created from eating the starches and the sugar, and it gets bigger and bigger. And then there's a point where the two don't connect anymore, the food source and the yeast. So if you just continue to let it rise, they would starve. So you have to punch it down to make sure that it can have its second meal. The 2 rises are important because in that time, while it's eating those starches and converting it to that gas, the structure and the texture of the bread is changing and improving. The starches are starting to hydrate, and that's where you get the tenderness. And it's also where you get the structure. And the other thing, the very important thing that happens, taste, taste, taste. If you let that yeast just relax and ride, put it in the refrigerator to do that bulk fermentation, that flavor will increase exponentially if you slow down that fermentation. So I said this would take from a half hour on a hot day to 2 hours on a cold day, but if you put it in the fridge overnight, it can take that long to rise, and in all that time, that flavor is increasing. Totally up to you, how much time you have, how soon you want bread, and how you want it to taste. So the question, do you have to let it warm up to room temperature? You do not. It's actually easier to handle when it's cold, which is pretty exciting, because this actually is cold. It started to rise so fast, I was like, hey-oh, I need to slow this puppy down. So I'm going to divide this into 2, as I said, 2 loaves, but if I want to be persnickety, which I do want to be, I'm going to weigh out how much the entire dough ball weighs. Bum, bum, bum. 1,412, so 706. So I'm gonna guess. So I always put my bench scraper right there and gauge, and I always gauge wrong every time. How much did I say that was? 706? Okay, let's see. Let's see what we do. 712. You warlock! How did you know? See what? You should be up here doing the division. So, oh my goodness. Okay, so I'll take just a wee bit. 707. Now it is time to shape the dough. And I'm going to shape it and put it into my tin. So this is the 9x4, and it's 4 high. So I enjoy a higher tin because in the event that you have underestimated your dough that if it continues to rise really high, it won't muffin top out. So it will have that structure on the side, keeping it nice and sturdy. The other thing is, what is wonderful about this dough is all that starch that is inherent. You saw all the starch that we put in there. It matters that we had that much moisture, that much starch. That gives bread structure. So if you've ever made a loaf that was from an enriched dough, so like a brioche dough, and you just try to do it in a loaf, what happens is that it gets spanxed or corseted in the side because there's not enough starch in that dough to allow it to have that rigid structure. The other thing I want to do is, you see I've lined it with parchment so that when it goes in there, I have two little handles so I can easily pull out the bread. But I'm going to spray on the sides so that it's literally glued to the inside. I'm going to make a crease on the bottom. I'm going to make a crease right here on the sides. And then I'm going to put clips here to keep these in place, because what can happen is that the parchment starts to slump down when you put the dough in. Now it is time to shape the dough. Notice I'm not putting flour down. I don't want any excess flour. This is cold enough and it's not sticky so that I don't have to have anything dry added to it. I'm going to press this dough just a little, and then I'm going to start from the corner farthest from me. Then I'm going to use my thumbs to make a little crease here. I'm going to turn the dough over, and I'm going to use my thumbs to gently press and seal the roll. And I'm using my palms to cup it so that it doesn't expand. And when I'm doing that, I'm also, if I did not punch down the dough well enough, if there are any really large bubbles, I'm popping them as I go, which is what I do want to do. And then if you notice that you're like, this might be too long, you can tuck those in and continue. And I'm also aware of the depth of the dough. I want this to be an even depth throughout so that when it rises evenly. Your hands are a very good indicator of how your dough is behaving. And even though this is very cool dough at the moment, if you're doing this with a room temperature dough, it is equally easy to handle. Just easier if it's cooler. That looks like a nice little nugget. Now I'm going to put my hands all the way underneath it, give it stability, and then I'm going to put it in. So you can see what would happen if these were just loosey-goosey when you're putting it in. And I'm just going to gently press so that it's even in the pan. I have 2 loaves that have already beautifully risen. And if I didn't say before, whenever you are letting anything rise, make sure that it's just covered nicely with plastic wrap, because you don't want it to form a skin on the top. It can dry out, and that's not a good thing. What you do want to see is it to have just crested above the tin. And then this is so ready to go. That said, I'm going to preheat my oven to 350, and it's going to bake for about 35 to 40 minutes. What's really important though is that it has a beautiful color on top, and that it will sound hollow when you kind of thump it on the bottom. But the best way to figure out whether it's truly done inside is a digital thermometer. 190 degrees will be the tell. If you put a digital thermometer right in the middle, or sometimes people like to do it on the side where it's less seen. So do it right here, 190 degrees, done. If you would like to get a little more oven spring, and this is the kind of yeast that is like, it is a structural powerhouse. One thing to help that along is a little bit of steam in the oven when you first start baking. So the best way to do that is on the bottom of the oven, have something like a sheet pan that is preheating along with the oven, or a skillet, a cast iron skillet, and then put a handful of ice cubes in there just before you put the bread in, and that will create the steamy environment, and that will allow the top to stay supple. If you put it in a dry oven, it's like me in winter. It is not pretty. It gets dry fast. So that little bit of steam does so much in helping it get glorious and big and fabulous. And you have that wonderful crumb inside that starch is helping with, and that lovely oven spring is helping with. It's so pretty. This is hot. I cannot slice it yet 'Tis the rule of breaddom. Don't slice it until it is completely cooled. The crumb is still setting. The texture needs to set itself. Mwah! So let it cool. However, I have some that's ready to go. Be right back. This is the best bread for the perfect sandwich of summer. The tomato sandwich, or you can call it a mater sandwich, totally up to you. These are fresh tomatoes from my garden. This is fresh bread from my oven, and now it's all gonna go into my belly. Now we've got our bread, perfect for slicing, and I'm going to slather that with mayo. The first time I ever had this sandwich was in Florida, and my Aunt Sis was making them, and my anticipation was I would get something with bacon or something with like a salty treat that I never got at home because we grew up vegan and we didn't get the bread, we didn't get the bacon, we didn't get any of that. And all of a sudden she just like sandwiches it together just with the tomato and mayo. I'm like, what the what? And I could not hide my disappointment, and she had that little smirk on her face because she knew the second I bit into it, my life would change. And it did. My job is done here. Not quite yet. I want a little bit of salt. And this is something that people forget to do, is to salt the tomato. Everything is going to be there for you in your mouth when you need it. Best sandwich ever.
If you're interested in more in-depth classes, both in person and online, visit sugargliderkitchen.com. Hey, don't forget to punch down those like and subscribe buttons.